Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The board will participate in 3 meetings today. We will begin with 2 workshops followed by the regular school board meeting. I'll now call the April 20th workshop of the School Board of Palm Beach County to order at 3 p.m. Ms. Bellata, please call the roll.
District 1, Barbara McQuinn. Here. District 2, Alexandria Ayala.
Here.
District 3, Karen Brill. Here. District 4, Erica Whitfield.
Here.
District 5, Frank Barbieri.
Here.
District 6, Marcia Andrews.
Here.
And District 7, Deborah Robinson.
Here.
We have quorum with all 7 board members in attendance. Also joining us, Superintendent Michael Burke, General Counsel Sean Bernard, Inspector General Teresa Michael, and Board Clerk Tony Bellata. Senior staff members will join us periodically as directed by the superintendent. Viewers and listeners can access the meeting today by either watching on Comcast Channel 234 or 235, UVerse Channel 99, or by using the YouTube link on our webpage at palmbeachschools.org. In the event that the link is interrupted for technical reasons, please switch over to the TV channels. All board meetings are recorded in their entirety and posted on the district website within 24 hours. We also offer a listening-only option, which the public can access by calling 561-357-5900 or toll-free at 1-866-930-7015. The meeting ID is 1-561-880-1124 #. This meeting is being transcribed by a closed captioner, so please remember to speak at a reasonable pace. Mr. Superintendent?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Barbieri. Our first workshop is our legislative wrap-up. The legislature, they finished back in March, but they've passed plenty of legislation this year that we have to now prepare to implement for the upcoming fiscal year, July 1st. So we thought it'd be worthwhile to kind of take the board through some of the more noteworthy bills and laws that were passed. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Boggess and the team.
Good afternoon, Superintendent Burke, Chairman Barbieri, Vice Chairwoman Brill, and esteemed board members. Today, as Superintendent said, we are coming as an end-of-session report for this legislative session 2022 here in the state of Florida. I'll remind the board, as we were in the first days of session, the superintendent, myself, and our Palm Beach delegation through Palm Beach County Days, our work towards this legislative session started well before that. Working with our board around legislative priorities through October, November, and then really putting that platform together to work with our legislative team with Mr. Ron LaFace, Ms. Megan Fay of Capital City Consulting, and Ms. Rita Solnett at the federal level, who has been instrumental both in DC and here locally. Today, we'll be working through what the budget impact was through this legislative session, bills passed, bills not passed, and then ultimately the impact to our system of schools right here in Palm Beach County. With that, I introduce Mr. Ron LaFace and Ms. Megan Fay, who will be working through specifically the state of Florida legislation. We will be holding on federal impact for today and focusing, due to the heavy content, focusing strictly on state of Florida. So with that, Mr. LaFace and Ms. Fay, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boggess. Good afternoon, everybody. Ron LaFace reporting live from Tallahassee. Appreciate the opportunity to present to you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and Superintendent. As you are aware, we're halfway through our first special session following the regular session. There are no education issues during this special session, so this report will be related to issues that occurred during regular session. Many of them that the governor still has not done any final action on, including the budget. But as you know, this session involved many divisive policy bills, and many of these bills were related to K through education. I'll begin by walking through some of the budget highlight, and then Ms. Fay and I will walk through many of the policy bills that, as Mr. Boggess mentioned, did pass that will impact us, and some bills that did not pass. But first, as it relates to the budget, the K-12 FEFP budget statewide is a very healthy budget. This year it was increased by over $1.7 billion. And of that, about $1 billion was increased in the base student allocation for a total per student funding of about $214.50 per student increase in the BSA. That's traditionally what we consider to be the flexible dollars and dollars that are available to the school district. So it was a very healthy increase. A lot of the reason why we did have that healthy increase was because the legislature itself did add some additional costs through other pieces of legislation on the district that they intended to or attempted to pay for through the base student allocation increase. And these are things such as there's $319 million of that $1 billion that's for new student growth. So they funded about 70,000 additional students statewide. They did put an estimated $400 million out of that $1 billion for the new requirements that all school districts pay every school district employee at least $15 an hour by October 1st. And that's estimated to be about a $400 million impact system-wide. The FRS, Florida Retirement System, district contribution is going to increase again this year. And system-wide, that's about 156 million. So the big numbers of that $1 billion flexible BSA increase, there's really about $128 million system-wide that's not already spent through other items in the budget or with legislation. And certainly that money will be used to cover some of the cost drivers that the district is facing, whether it be inflationary costs or gas prices or the such. Did want to point out again that both of the West Tech project as well as the oral history project were fully funded. I'd like to thank Ms. Solnet for delivering a packet of support letters from the community, which we delivered to the governor's office today to help support those projects. And we have been working with the governor's office to try to have those projects approved when he does review the budget. A couple of items in the FEFP that I would like to point out that are in addition to the base student allocation is the legislature did increase the salary categorical by an additional $250 million. And they did split in that additional 250 that half of it, or 125 million, would have to be used to prioritize starting teacher salary to get it up to 47.5. And then either if we're already at districts that are at 47.5, as well as that second half of the 250 can be spent to give salary increases to veteran teachers. The legislature did increase the transportation categorical by 56 million, which was a help there. They did increase mental health categorical by 20 million. And one of the large increases that we worked on a lot during session was an increase into the reading categorical of $40 million. And the legislature not only increased the reading allocation, but also in the budget, one of the budget conforming bills did provide districts with flexibility on how we spend those dollars, which was welcomed, and I will go over that when I get to the budget conforming bill. A big item of importance, that we spent a lot of time talking about was included in the implementing bill, and that's the ultimate result of the Putting Parents First adjustment. This is the $200 million that was originally intended to shift from the so-called 12 non-compliant school districts with mask policies within the FPFP and shift it into other districts. We were certainly very opposed to that effort, and ultimately the legislature did not include that in the FEFP. What they did instead of moving money from one district to another is they this year funded the school recognition program, which is a program that has sometimes been funded, sometimes not been funded, but it recognizes teacher performance and provides bonuses to teachers based on school grades, or as well as the additional funds that can be spent in the classroom. And what the legislature did when they funded the recognition program is they put $200 million into the program, but then said any district that was not in compliance with the mask policy would not be eligible for these teacher bonuses. So the legislature viewed it as, we're not taking money away from any districts, but we are funding and giving money to districts that were in compliance in a category that that's not always funded. And for example, recognition was not funded last year. I will say we're continuing to have conversations with the state on this issue. The governor has made it clear multiple times that he, even when in the discussions of the Putting Parents First FEFP adjustment, he did not want any dollars coming out of the classroom, which is where the recognition dollars go. So we're continuing to have conversations with the governor's office about how this provision will be implemented, because it will be up to the governor's office and the DOE to decide how this allocation is actually allocated once school grades come out later this fall. So I would say keep this issue on your radar screen, but that's how it ultimately landed. I would like to point out in the tax bill each year, the legislature has a tax bill that covers probably 30 or 40 different tax items. But there were two issues in there that benefited school districts that we supported. The first one would authorize for districts to purchase buses or lease buses or maintenance vehicles using capital outlay surtax dollars, which is something that some districts have been doing, but it resulted in some audit findings. So it clarified the authority to spend those dollars on transportation. And they also increased the amount per student of our 1.5 mils that we can spend for certain operational costs. So that's just some additional flexibility with our 1.5 mils. This year, kind of similar to some years in the past that I know all board members are familiar, the legislature did decide to do a very comprehensive budget conforming bill. Budget conforming bills are supposed to be related to budget items only and changing the law around budget decisions. But this year, as it has happened it hasn't been for a couple of years, but in years past, the legislature did include a lot of policy into the education budget conforming bill. There were many bills that didn't pass the House or the Senate and were at various stops in between that ended up coming out in the budget as part of the budget conforming bill. And this year, the budget conforming bill modifies virtual instruction by adjusting how it's funded. It requires districts to provide regular updates on school capacity and wait lists and increases student choice transportation scholarships. It also modifies the school readiness funding program. It requires the State Board of Education to annually review the school grading scale and actually make an adjustment based on how many A's or B's. It's kind of a continuous improvement to the state grading scale. Now that grading scale change doesn't take effect, I believe, until the 24-25 school year, but it is something that we will need to keep on our radar screens for accountability purposes. It does require the state to start collecting data from school districts on the amount of instructional time spent on state and district required assessments. It does specify that the teacher evaluation procedures are not a mandatory subject of collective bargaining. I believe in Palm Beach, we voluntarily collectively bargain our teacher evaluation, but it makes clear in the law that it's not mandatory to do that. It's a district decision. It also requires that districts include compensation for longevity in calculating salary adjustments on the grandfather schedule, and requires that districts use basically a state clearinghouse for background screening with the Agency for Healthcare Administration. So as you can see, there's a number of items in the budget conforming bill. That's not a list of every single nuanced item, but those are kind of the high points that we wanted to draw out and make you aware of.
Mr. LaFace,
Yes.
before you move on, I think there's a couple questions the board members have before we get too far into it. Vice Chairwoman Brew.
Thank you. So actually, my questions are probably, well, definitely geared more to the superintendent, but I know that we obviously negotiate our teacher salaries. If you look at the teacher pay increase on the first page, where it says that the other half can be used to increase salaries for veteran teachers, and I guess you could also use the minimum salaries or maybe raise them, but can that pot of money be used to address the salary compression? Is that something that we can look at
Yes.
going forward?
Yes, this is money for next year, so as we negotiate next year, we did get a little help here. There's still some statutory constraints on how we dole out the money, but since the district has met the 47.5, and later tonight you'll actually see our beginning salary go up to 48,000 and change. We do have some requirement to raise the minimum, a percentage of what we raise all teacher salaries, but yes, that increased allocation is welcome, and it will help our veteran teachers.
And just as my other question, if I may, on the next page, the implementing bill, the school recognition, the $200 million. I know that Broward County is challenging that. Are we planning, have we been discussing whether we should challenge that legally?
I may defer to our general counsel on that. I know at the staff level, we are still, and Mr. LaFace has been working, I believe, with the governor's office to try to argue our case that, we did comply when House Bill 1 was passed last November, and that we believe we were compliant, and that it would be a great disservice to exclude the Palm Beach County schools from that grant. Our students and teachers will have earned it based on their performance. So
So
I'm interested in a potential challenge. I know we have not given up on, with the legislative team is still pursuing that.
So just as a follow-up, I would ask that as soon as you get a response from their office, that you let us know so that we can discuss if there's any action that we need to take. Thank you.
I can do that. I also had these conversations with FADS last week at the superintendent's conference, so it's a hot issue.
Mrs. Andrews?
This question is for Mr. LaFace, especially on the $200 million school recognition. You know, a lot of this money is going to be working for our students, especially with our A-rated district and all of our A-rated schools. Mr. LaFace, how are you going to help us as I know you're monitoring this situation with the governor. What can you help us do to get the word out how concerned we are of this? We know what has happened. We know what other districts are doing. But what will you do to help us with advice on where we may need to go, working through our superintendent and the board?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Andrews. Yes, Ms. Fay and I are having regular meetings with the governor's office on this item, as well as working with the other impacted school districts as we approach how the recognition dollars are going to be handled. And I think it's important, especially with these questions, to give a little bit more detail into the process of how this money is actually allocated under the budget and the implementing bill. First, we will need school grades for this year because the recognition dollars are based on school grades from the current year. So when we do receive grades in the early summer, that would be normally the standpoint for eligibility of the recognition dollars. Now, this year, there is language that says an additional eligibility requirement is compliance with emergency rules relating to masking. And that's really the issue that is under consideration, is what does that actually mean and how it will be implemented. The legislation leaves it up to the Department of Education to issue that allocation. So once they receive grades of who would normally qualify and then review the language for how these dollars, this additional eligibility, they will come up with a list of how much is then allocated to every district in the state, whether the number is a certain, $50 million or whether the number is zero. At that point is where you're hearing from other districts that if they do get a zero there, that they would be interested in litigation. So in my conversations with Broward's administration, they're not talking about any litigation now. It would be in the future once the allocation is done by the state of a potential challenge. And we're all working together to see how that allocation by the department will come out. And what I can reiterate and what has been reiterated to me as well as publicly said by the governor is throughout this entire effort talking about districts that may or may not have been in compliance with Department of Health rules or the subsequent legislative session where they created a law about masking. The governor never intended for any money to come out of the classroom, and they are very aware that recognition dollars go into the classroom. So that's what we will continue to work on, and we will certainly keep the administration involved in those discussions as this process plays out. But I just wanted to make sure that you saw that this is the ultimate outcome of this is not going to really be known until the summertime of this year is when that allocation list would be in a position to be finalized after grades.
Mrs. Andrews?
And just a follow-up for our parents, because these are our teachers who are actually teaching the students who are doing great work here in the school district of Palm Beach County, as well as the other counties that have been penalized by this. I would like for you to make sure you work with us and keep us informed with what other districts are doing, because maybe we need to have some mobilization from our communities and our parents as we begin to look and see how this will hurt us, because it is going to hurt us. It's going to hurt our teachers, who are the key players for student achievement, being in the classroom. No more important people in a school other than the teacher and the students. So I'm hoping that you will be gathering information from all of the other districts, helping us to get a plan together, even if it's not a legal plan, a plan together on how we educate the public about this money that is not at this point in time, coming to Palm Beach County School District and how we can maybe change some minds to let them know it is impacting children. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. LaFace. You can continue. That's all questions at this time.
Okay. Thank you. So we're going to move into some of the policy bills now after, because I did complete the budget. So that was a great time to stop and ask those questions as we kind of transition into the other policy bills. I'm going to begin with Senate Bill 1048, which is the student assessment bill by Senator Diaz. This bill has subsequently since the session been approved by the governor, and it effectively replaces the math and ELA Florida Standards Assessment with a coordinated screening and progress monitoring. We've talked about this effort since the governor announced it many times, but the overall intent is to replace the FSA with 3 shorter tests a year, mainly a progress monitoring 1, a progress monitoring 2, and a progress monitoring 3, which would ultimately translate into the summative assessment of what we currently get with the Florida Standards, the FSA. It also provides a 1-year transition during the implementation of this new progress monitoring standards assessment, and it will effectively hold students and schools harmless during this transition year. I kind of put this as the bottom line of this bill, is that there will be an FSA this year with school grades. Next school year, there will not be an FSA, but instead there will be a P1, P2, and P3, which are the acronyms that folks are using for progress monitoring 1 through 3. And there will be grades next year, but there will be a hold harmless on any impact from the grades. So that no schools will be put into turnaround because of the grade and so forth. The next bill I'd like to mention is House Bill 1557, Parental Rights in Education by Representative Harding. This is a bill that you all are very familiar with as well, nicknamed the Don't Say Gay bill. And basically the district is prohibited from requiring information being withheld from parents about a child or encourage students to withhold information from their parents. And the bill also certainly prohibits instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity in K through 3 or in a manner that's not age appropriate. And finally, the bill has a parent compliant resolution or complaint resolution process with effectively a cause of action at the end if they're not satisfied with the way that the district or a mediator has handled their complaints. This bill has been approved by the governor, so it is the law. We're working pretty diligently to try to understand the district impact and draft our policies and procedures around these new requirements. The next bill is House Bill 7, which is known as the Stop Woke Act. And this bill, as you all are aware, creates a list of topics that cannot be taught or used in employee training. The bill does have somewhat of a safe harbor provision that is a little confusing, but we're trying to work through the language that basically says that the bill does not apply to topics that are included in the history standards and are supposed to be taught, as long as they're not being taught in a way that includes any of the concepts that are not supposed to be used. And those are concepts such as having students feel guilt about past racism and so forth. So that is a bill that, like the Don't Say Gay bill, that we're working through the implementation of. The last bill that I'm going to talk about before I turn it over to Ms. Fay is House Bill 758, related to education by Senator Diaz. We refer to this bill as the Arranged Marriage Bill. It's a bill that establishes a statewide charter review commission that will review and approve charter school applications. This is it's a concept. I mean, this bill has been around for a while. It's been proposed, but it's a concept that's somewhat similar to the way that charters operate today. But instead of the charters going directly to the district, and if they're denied, then appealing that to the state board or the charter review commission, this would provide a charter school with an opportunity, instead of going to the district for approval, to go to this new statewide charter school commission as an authorizer. And then if they're authorized at the state level, the school district would be required to then contract and oversee this charter school. The bill, in addition to that, has a couple of other components just to flag because they are of some importance. The bill does authorize legislators to visit school campuses. The bill also prohibits a district from imposing additional reporting requirements on charter schools unless they're in financial trouble. And finally, the bill does prohibit districts from withholding the charters portion of the teacher salary allocation if it was being held because the district does not yet have an approved salary allocation plan from the state. And so, so with those provisions, Ms. Fay, if you want to pick it up there.
Thanks, Ron. The next bill that we're going to discuss today is House Bill 1467, K-12 education by Representative Garrison. This bill has had several different iterations throughout the legislative session involving school board members. In the earlier version of the bill, it did eliminate school board salaries entirely. And then I believe in a second version of the bill, it tied them to legislature salaries. But the ultimate version of the bill that passed and was approved by the governor establishes 12-year term limits for school board members. And that 12-year term begins, I guess the clock begins starting November of this year, so November of 2022. The bill also increases transparency and public involvement in the selection and removal of both library materials and instructional materials. And I do want to point out that the bill, something that's not mentioned on the slide, but the bill does direct the Department of Education to develop training for media specialists who are going to be selecting library materials and selecting books that are on reading lists. The department, although the bill is effective July 1st, the Department of Education is directed to have that training available by January 1st of 2023. And so there may be kind of a delay in getting that training from the Department of Education, but you know, Ron and I will continue to work with the department over the coming weeks and months. The next bill, charter school charters by Representative Hawkins. This bill actually kind of stems out of a situation that happened in Hillsborough County last summer where several charter schools were terminated. I believe it was June or July before the school year started, you know, a month later. And so kind of the main provision in the bill is that the school district, if you are terminating a charter school for cause, you have to provide notice to the charter school of your decision to non-renew or terminate at least 90 days before the end of the school year. So it'd be 90 days before, you know, probably like a May 15th school year end. So that, but the intent of that bill being that, you know, parents will have adequate notice and time to find an alternative school for their child to attend in August.
Ms. Fay,
Yes.
I should have asked this one on HB 758, the Charter School Review Commission. How much authority will the school board have over the operations of those schools since we're paying the money out? I mean, do we have any authority, any additional authority since we didn't approve those?
Yeah, the school district, even though the school district does not approve the charter school and it's approved at the state level, the school district is still the sponsor of the charter school, the local sponsor. And so you would have, it does not change any requirements or oversights. You have the same oversight as the local, you know, sponsor that you have today, and all of the same requirements apply to charter schools as far as, you know, financial stability. They'll have to comply with the same rules and regulations that they do today. It's just it's a secondary path for initial authorization at the state level.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Andrews.
Since we have this new layer with House Bill 758, and there's going to be technical assistance coming from the DOE with the contract with the colleges and the universities, as well as just getting appointees now that will be a part of the State Board of Education. So if we, as a school district, actually deny someone, will these people, the new people in these places, have a bit more power than we have to override us?
So I guess the answer is sort of twofold. So there's today, currently the way that the process works is that the school district does the vetting and reviews a charter school application and decides to deny the charter school. That charter school already has the ability to appeal to the State Board of Education. This would be a kind of an alternative forum. And so I think that the Charter School Review Commission is sort of meant to be an alternative. You go directly to the state instead of coming to the local school board.
And one thing to add to that, if a charter does decide to apply to this new charter school statewide authorizer, instead of going directly to the district to be initially authorized, the district does have an opportunity to provide comments on the charter school's application, and the department is supposed to consider those comments when they are looking at authorizing the charter school from a statewide perspective.
Ms. Ayala.
Thank you, Mr. LaFace and Ms. Fay. I had a question for clarity on SB 1048, going a little bit back. So to clarify, this bill, which was supposed to eliminate high-stakes testing for our students, takes one exam that took place over multiple days to 6. So now students will be tested 6 times instead of 1?
And that's a very good question, because certainly this new assessment tool is being constructed at the moment at the department through use of 2 different assessment vendors. The intent of it, and now we've not seen the tool actually developed because, like I said, it's still in its early stages. The intent of it is to replace the current FSA, which is, a single assessment, with 3 separate progress monitoring assessments. So it's going from 1 to 3, and the thought behind that was these are similar to progress monitorings that districts are already using throughout the school year to take sort of a assessment at the beginning of where students are, midway through, and at the end. It's unknown how this is going to ultimately operate, but one of the differences is that they are trying to incorporate into the progress monitoring is they are doing it through a computer adaptive program. So the intent is not to have more testing time if it operates correctly, but through computer adaptive testing, have the student in between P1, P2, and P3 get the same summative results that we would get from a single FSA. And each one of those assessments to be a much shorter assessment and not only measuring the student's mastery of benchmarks, but also inform the teacher of any deficiencies that they have through the process. So that is the current intent of it. But as I mentioned, this assessment tool is currently under development.
Vice Chair Brill.
Thank you. So just in addition to the question that Ms. Ayala posted or just asked, my concern is going to be, of course, for students with disabilities, if it's going to be computer-based. I know the FSA, there were certain allowances based upon accommodations in their IEP. I think that we as a board and through our ESC department are going to have to carefully monitor that, because there may be a number of students excluded or not able to get a standard diploma as a result of the shift to this new set of rules. The word itself, progress monitoring, sounds lovely, but when you dig into it a little bit deeper, it could cause some barriers for those students. So I hope we keep an eye on that.
Go ahead, Ms. Fay.
Okay, thank you so much. Moving to slide 8, the next bill I just want to touch on is restraint of students with disabilities. This bill builds upon some legislation that was passed last session, and the bill essentially prohibits the use of mechanical restraints, which are defined as handcuffs, by any school personnel except for school resource officers, school safety officers, school guardians, or school security guards. And the bill essentially just makes clear that if a mechanical restraint is defined as handcuffs for students in grades 6 through 12. The next bill, House Bill 899, mental health of students. This bill clarifies some reporting requirements that to make sure that charter schools are also reporting to the Department of Education and to the Department of Children and Families the number of involuntary examinations, so Baker Acts, that are happening on their campuses every year. And the bill also requires all school districts to appoint a district-wide mental health coordinator to serve kind of as the primary point of contact for coordination of mental health services throughout the school district. Moving on, Senate Bill 1054, financial literacy instruction. So this bill makes some changes to the way that financial literacy instruction will be delivered by the school district, beginning with students entering 9th grade in the 23-24 school year. Currently, financial literacy is often embedded within another course. For example, we've heard that it's typically embedded in an economics course. This bill essentially requires financial literacy and money management to be required as a half-credit elective, so it'll be a one-semester elective for students entering grade 9 in 23-24. And so there will be probably some implementation challenges and some scheduling and calendaring changes that will need to happen. But there is a glide path, a full year, knowing that those changes will have to occur before the bill takes effect. And the last bill I want to touch on is House Bill 921, campaign financing. This bill, as well as financial literacy, have both been approved by the governor. The campaign financing bill is something we want to put on your radar because it does impact the ability for public funds to be spent in the way that a public entity can communicate with the electorate as far as an advocacy campaign for a local referendum. And so, just something that we've been speaking with the superintendent and the general counsel, the chief of staff about how to go about making sure that you're in compliance with this law, as you look towards November or August with any sort of push to renew a local referendum for local funds. And then the last bill to touch on, House Bill 1421, school safety. This bill was kind of the last series of adoption of recommendations from the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Commission. It also actually extends the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Commission through July 1st of 2026, meaning that we may have more recommendations in the future that the legislature will adopt. And it also requires the Commissioner of Education more specifically to oversee and enforce school safety and compliance. So really directing the Office of Safe Schools to take more of an active role in making sure that districts understand the requirements that are in law and are compliant with those requirements. And then I'll touch quickly just on bills that did not pass.
Ms. Fay, this is Frank Barbieri. Let me ask you a quick question. On HB 1421, it says that it requires law enforcement responsible for responding to schools in the event of a sale emergency be physically present and participate in active assailant drills. We have these, what you call them? Mutual aid agreements with the municipalities and the sheriff's office. So, I mean, are we supposed to then, every time we do these active assailant drills, have the local municipality that would be responding to us also provide officers with our own officers to participate and be present in those drills?
So, yes, sir. I believe that the intent of the legislature and the discussion in committee was that there are school districts who were practicing the active assailant drills, and there were no law enforcement present, whether it's a school resource officer, a school safety officer, or if it is mutual aid, it would be, the responsibility to have, I don't know how many, but to have law enforcement present on campus so that they are, a part of those drills as they're happening. And so there's no disconnect in the event of an actual emergency between, what's been practiced on campus and what law enforcement is anticipating.
All right, I think the district, certainly the board's going to need clarification on who's responsible for being there because, for example, in Delray Beach, you may have the Boca Police responding, the Delray Beach Police responding, and Boynton Beach if there's a problem in a Delray school. So if there's an active assailant drills, that would require us to have 3 different police departments plus our own police officers be present for those drills. So we're going to need some clarification on exactly who's supposed to participate. Because the way you worded it, it says law enforcement responsible for responding to schools. We have these mutual aid agreements where there are responsibilities on municipalities to show up if we ask them to be there. So we're going to need some clarification on that.
Absolutely.
Mrs. Whitfield?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a quick question, Ms. Fay, about HB 921, about the campaign financing. in it, it talks about our ability to communicate with the public. Does that inhibit how much school board members are able to speak on it? Are we allowed to, in our going around in the community, speak about upcoming referendums, or is that something that hinders us as well?
So this is an interesting one because there's changes, and as we've kind of discussed them internally, the changes that are made in the bill are not extremely clear. And so I think that I hate to say that this upcoming November will be a test case, but I read the bill and the new requirements to be directed more at written communications, like for example mailers or advertisements that would go out to the community. We can certainly try to find out and work with the council's office to see what their opinion is on verbal communications from the school board to the community, as kind of part of your day-to-day job.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fay. You can continue.
Okay. So jumping to legislation that did not pass, I'll just touch quickly on some of these that we had spent time covering during cabinet updates. The first one, which was probably the bill that was most discussed because of its potential to have a significant impact to the district, was the sovereign immunity bill. There was a proposal in both chambers that would have increased the sovereign immunity limits. So and that would have, they're both different, but neither of them ended up passing at the end of the day. And so for this coming school year, for this year, the status quo remains. So that is $200,000 per individual claim and $300,000 for claims in the aggregate. I will say that I think that there was a tremendous amount of interest in looking at those, the levels of those caps. And so I do anticipate that we see bills that are similar refiled next legislative session. One of the other bills that I wanted to touch on that did not pass but did have some discussion, particularly on the Senate side, would have required school districts to pick up students instead of within a 2 mile radius of the school that they're zoned for, picking them up 1 mile away. So students that are currently either not bused or courtesy bused, the school district would have a requirement to pick them up. This was something that when Superintendent Burke was in Tallahassee for legislative days, we did speak to many members about the financial and logistical burden that would have on the school district. And fortunately, the bill did not ultimately pass, I think because of a lot of the feedback from Palm Beach and other school districts about the practical impacts of increasing that radius. And then just skipping to the last page, a couple of bills that did not pass. There were additional school board member legislation filed. Particularly, one I'd like to point out is 35 and 244 partisan elections for members of district school boards. I think that you probably did see this was covered in the press, and you guys were aware of it. These bills did not ultimately move or end up passing, but I think that it's safe to say that we'll see similar legislation filed again next year, just sort of as the conversation continues. And then the last bill, just to touch on the Florida Institute for Charter School Innovation. This was another bill that didn't make it across the finish line, but would have established sort of like a think tank, a best practices resources for charter schools that would have been housed at Miami-Dade College and would have had legislative appropriation, but did not make it across the finish line at the end of the day. And so with that, Ron and I can kind of stand by to take some more questions if there are any.
Yep. Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you. Can you tell me about the single source for the math books? At this point in time, we have 54, we have to eliminate 54 math books based on what's happening right now in the law. And it's going to cost money, and Palm Beach County will be impacted. Can you tell me how that's going to actually work as it relates to all of these school districts, but especially Palm Beach County?
Yes, Ms. Andrews, I can certainly talk about that. That's been a topic du jour up here in Tallahassee since the list was released, I believe, on Friday. So the process that is occurring is the state, as you all are aware, each year as a part of the adoption cycle, adopts courses at each grade level from all of the different publishers. The outcome of that adoption list is that that is a list that then districts use and interview different publisher groups and make a selection off of the state list, because you know that the state list has been vetted for alignment and to make sure that it includes all of the standards and benchmarks that students will be tested on. And so that's traditionally how this process has worked very well. This year, there was an additional level of review of math textbooks, not just from standards alignment, but also for what's called unsolicited strategies, which are things such as SEL, CRT, and certainly some of the other topics that we've seen in the news. And with the normal standards alignment, as well as the review for unsolicited topics, many of the big publishers books did not make adoption, particularly on the K through 5 level, but then certainly intermittently through the higher grade levels. And I think, Ms. Andrews, to your comment, in the K through 5 level, there was only one program actually adopted on the statewide list. What has occurred since that list came out, and it's happened with other adoptions in the past, is that the publishers have an opportunity to appeal that decision. It's a process that they tell the state they would like to appeal it. They receive the reports from the expert reviewers who reviewed their materials, where they noted that the reviewers had found deficiencies, and then the publishers have an opportunity to either address the issue that was raised or somewhat disagree with it and say, no, I know that you said that this standard was not included, but if you look on page 31, it is in fact there. And in the past, that has happened, as well as publishers have the opportunity to make additions or changes to their materials in order to have them put on the list. It's my understanding that all of the publishers, at least on K5, who did not make the adopted list, are currently in that appeals process. And I believe that they're working with the department to try to work through that process as quickly as possible, because school districts are certainly in a position where you all are ready to take board action on whatever program you've decided. And certainly as a part of that action, being on the state adopted list is something that you guys look for. So it's a process that's been implemented, or that is currently being worked on between the department and the publishers. And like I said, I believe that all of the publishers, at least on K5, are going through that appeals process to attempt to get their materials on the adopted list.
All right, General Counsel, when you and I spoke earlier today or yesterday, you indicated that you thought we had signed some contracts to buy some of the books already that are now on the disapproved list. Were you able to confirm any of that?
I think the district can. I last got an update that the first set of books had not been purchased, but I'd feel more comfortable if the district spoke to those stats.
So the team has been digging into this, this week. What I understand is the initial books that are already underway and have been ordered and purchased were okay. They were not caught up in this. They remained on the state's approved list. We do have another, we buy several different books, different grade levels. There's a second list of materials that we were just about, we go through a comment period that's 30 days, and this comment period was going to end on April 22nd, and some of the books within that grouping are now in this position where they have to appeal to the state. They've been disapproved. But I believe we can hit the brakes and take a pause there without suffering any financial damage. But I think a timely resolution remains very important, because we're trying to buy these books to get ready for the upcoming school year, so time is of the essence. I can report back to the board, try to get more information. This is kind of a late-breaking issue. I know the team met. I didn't have a chance to sit in that meeting personally, but we had our finance team, our purchasing team, our general counsel's office, and our instructional materials team, along with Dr. Sheffield, were all engaged. So that's where things currently stand, and we'll continue to keep the board apprised.
So a question for you, Mr. LaFace, then. Does Mr. Corcoran understand that we purchased books off a list that was already approved by the State Board of Education, and had we already paid for those books and signed contracts, we would now be faced with a situation where we're in breach of contract for not paying for those books? I mean, there's got to be some common sense up there in Tallahassee when they give us a list of approved books, which we start looking at back in October, and then this late in the year, they decide that the books that they originally approved are no longer approvable, I mean, there's got to be some recognition up there that that causes problems, for, especially for large districts when we have to order millions of dollars worth of books. So I'm hoping that you can figure out some way to convey that message to them that late in the game, they can't be doing these things. If they, you know, the other thing I'd like to know is everybody keeps asking me, what's in the math book that's CRT? So I'd certainly like to know. I guess their response was it's copyrighted material and it can't be released to the school boards. But, I mean, how do we know whether we're violating some provision with, you know, Corcoran if we don't know exactly what language was in those math books that was problematic? So it'd be helpful if you could get some information from the Department of Education or Mr. Corcoran on what exactly was in those math books that he found objectionable, so that we can make sure we steer clear of that in the future. Again, these are books that were already approved by the State Board of Education, so they should have probably made that decision before they put them on the list rather than afterwards. But it certainly would be helpful if we had that information as to what was objectionable in those math books, because I'm sure my colleagues have been asked the same question that I've been asked by many people, is what possibly could you be having a math book that's race-related? I mean, unless they're using examples, I can't even imagine, but it would be nice to get the answer to that. So if you could get us some information, it'd be appreciated. Mrs. Andrews, then Ms. Ayala.
Thank you to Mr. Chair, the superintendent, and the administration. With all of these sweeping changes that are happening so quickly, I am concerned about our teachers and our schools and educating them on this session of what it's all about. That's passed quickly. The professional development for people to understand what they need to do and how they need to do it. I think we have great schools and great teachers and principals, and they're excellent with what they do. But with these bills that have been so controversial over this past session, we've got to make sure that we go over it very thoroughly with our schools and our teachers and our principals to make sure they understand exactly what's taking place. Now, some of these, you know, you got a little time, but a lot of this stuff impacts July 1. I also think that when we're out in the community at these educational advisory boards and talking to these communities, we're going to have a little bit more extensive conversation about this past legislative session and what it means to all of us, to the parents, to the communities, especially to the schools who will be implementing these new processes, these laws that have come into place. And there are a lot of serious things in this packet that we have here, which is a summary. And when you dig deeper, there's even more things that we need to look at, just like we're dealing with textbooks right now for math, when people are saying, what are you all talking about? So this conversation needs to be led by us as we work with our schools as well as our communities. And I'm hoping that as I'm out at these meetings, that there will be a component over the next month, because we're almost out of school, to get people ready, because July 1 is right here and it's upon us. And these things are already in place, and people are looking to see if the school district of Palm Beach County is following the law. Certainly we will be doing that, but it does take preparation, collaboration, and actually professional development with people to implement. And I believe our instructors are excellent, but I think we still better make sure we underline this stuff and make sure that everybody's aware of what the new laws are, when they're going to take effect, and how we're going to address them as we move forward. Thank you.
Can I just offer something? And Mrs. Andrews, I couldn't agree more, and that's what our challenge, and that's what we're going to do. But I do want to share just some frustration at the state level, because these laws are passed or the big announcements are made at the highest level from the governor to Commissioner of Education, and then when the 67 school districts then reach out to the Florida Department of Education to get guidance, that's slow to follow. There's a lag. And so we are kind of left often to figure these things out for ourselves. And that has been really, I guess, that's happened in the past, but now we're seeing it happen more frequently on a bigger level. So our team we're scrambling, you know, and we're going to do what we need to do to support our schools, but I do want to point out that often we could use some guidance from the Florida Department of Education, and we don't always get that in a timely manner, particularly to impact the upcoming school year. So we're working through it.
Ms. Ayala?
Thank you. I was hoping that Mr. LaFace and Ms. Fay could give me some insight on something that I question if it's related to HB 1557. The DOE at the state level decided to pull Florida out of a CDC survey, and it's known as the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System. It's taken place for over 3 decades, and it not only is it really critical information about students, mental well-being, if they're having suicidal thoughts, and it does include questions about their sexual identification and gender identity. But I'm concerned about that because I think we use this information for a lot of valuable things, but external organizations, to my understanding, also use this data to receive grants that they use to give services back to the community. So I was wondering if you knew about this, because it's kind of snuck under the radar, and I think it's coming on the coattails of 1557, and not many people know about it yet. But if you do know, are we planning any kind of alternative, or are we in peril of losing funds or support based on what this data provides?
Thank you very much for the question. This is, as I understand it, to be a very new development. It's not something that we were aware was going to occur before the announcement, but we did certainly see the announcement that I believe it's the Department of Health and the State Surgeon General who has decided to no longer participate. So that's effectively all that we know at this point. We're planning to look into it a little bit further and understand any downstream impacts and how we figure out workarounds, particularly when it relates to federal funding. But as I understand it, today it was a decision by the Surgeon General to no longer participate in the survey.
Mrs. Andrews?
I can't let it go by without thanking Mr. LaFace and Capital City Consulting and Megan, and especially Rita Solnet for the work that you do. It's been really tough. It's tough every year, but this year it's been really something, and you all have stood up and helped us out in so many ways. Ms. Solnet with the Everglades Restoration Bill and the money that came down from the governor, thank you. For your work with the Glades region and for the West Tech. We're in the budget. We don't know where it will go, but we have our fingers crossed that we'll get some more help for the Western communities, the Glades region, but just for the work that needs to be done within our school district with this rapid change that's upon us as we work with our children in our schools. Thank you for helping us and explaining, but I need you to be on standby, because as we begin to implement these things, as our superintendent has indicated just a few minutes ago, many times we don't get the help we need for real good implementation. I don't want a teacher or a school to get in trouble because for some reason we're doing the best that we can based on what somebody has given us as what the new law is, and we don't have really the time to do what we need to do, and something goes wrong, and then we end up, in the news or on the radio or television about something that we didn't have the time to digest and work through to make sure that we're correct. Just like what's happened with the textbooks. All that stuff just happened like overnight, and bam, it's in the newspaper, it's everywhere. And so as we begin to look at this, all of this, July 1, thank you, but I need you to keep your phone lines open. And so that if we need to bring you back in here, all of you, to help us strategize what our next steps are, that we follow the law and do what's necessary, but for most of all, that we take care of our children and our schools so that they can get the best education possible in following the law, as well as making sure that we have the right information to carry the law out and to do it in a timely manner. And if we may need some extensions, we're going to ask you. You're sitting right there with the governor in Tallahassee, Capital City Consultants. You're our lifeline there in Tallahassee. We may need you to go over to the governor and say, hey, this is something that we're having a cog in the wheel here, and we may need to kind of extend something. So whatever we need to do to make sure people can understand what the processes are, the law is, for them to move forward, we're going to ask you to help us. And if we find it, Mr. Superintendent, through the chair to Mr. Superintendent, this is why we have Capital City Consultant right there, consulting right there in Tallahassee, and Ms. Solnet, and any of our parents, or whoever we have to ask to help us move forward. We need to just do what we have to do for the benefit of Palm Beach County School District, our children, our schools, and our community. Thank you.
Dr. Robinson?
Thank you. So I'm sitting here trying to find all my nice words. Because some of this stuff I think is just straight hate coming from the highest legislative seats in our state. Okay, so let me just try to find my nice words. This is what one of the many things that disturbs me. And I can't remember if it was the Don't Say Gay bill or the White Fragility bill or both, that basically had language that I interpreted to encourage parents to complain and sue. And specifically, I was concerned about teachers if they weren't, like following the rules in whoever's mind this is, since, they talk about teaching true history, like, I don't know whose form of true history we're talking about, but okay, I'll come back. So my real question that I'm trying to get to here is, so I'm going to work under the assumption that we are going to develop some guidelines for educators to follow in terms of walking this tightrope, which they're creating in Tallahassee for our teachers, right? And if they walk this tightrope, I just need some kind of comfort that if a parent complains and we look and they've followed the guidelines, can they actually be individually sued? Can we protect them? I need, to whatever degree of clarification I can get today or next week, whenever, but I'm telling you that's my issue. It's already thrown ice water on teachers, and if we mean like 10% of what we said in our mission and vision, we need to stand up on this mess. So I think my question is for General Counsel, like, can we protect our teachers?
Okay, I think I heard two questions. Can they be sued? Well, anybody can be sued, so that's an easy one. Can we, meaning the district legal authority, represent a teacher who has been sued? That would be something that the board would have to give authority, because typically teachers are not represented, or I shouldn't even say teachers, staff, employees of the district are not represented by the district without the board authority to do so.
So, Mr. Burke, you were going to say something?
Why don't you go ahead, and then I may have a comment.
Okay, so I have these words in my head about if you're operating within the, whatever, the rules of your job or whatever. So I think that we need to make some kind of declarative statement with regards to this. And, I understand that if a teacher was sued, that somebody, who I don't know who that is, would need to look and see were they following the rules as outlined by guidance from, our superintendent and staff. But I want us to make a declarative statement about protecting our teachers who want to teach the truth, right? And then the other thing is, if they're named, how likely is it then that the judge would dismiss them from the case? I'm going to assume that the district would get sued and the teacher would get sued and everybody and their mother would get sued, but how likely is it that the judge would dismiss the teacher from the case and leave us as the defendants?
That's really hard to say. I mean, it's going to depend on the facts.
Okay, so here's my position. Nobody asked me, but I'm gonna tell you, right? We need to, as the academic house with legal outlines, however much guidance our educators need to walk this tightrope, to teach as much of the truth as possible, to educate, affirm, and inspire, okay? We need to give them the guidance, right? And we need to outline and make declarative statements that say, if you follow this, we got you. We got your back. I need us to do that, or else we are tucking tail, putting our head in the sand, and telling our teachers to fend for themselves, and I'm not with that at all. Thank you.
You know, Mr. LaFace cautioned us, I think, at a previous legislative workshop that these bills could prompt a lot of policies and procedures, that we're going to be busy creating all this stuff. I think, given how hard it is to recruit teachers to the profession, given this board's commitment to our teachers, which we'll see through a salary settlement later this evening, I agree that we need to do something to say this, you know, it's probably going to be tricky. The details of all this we haven't figured out, but I agree with you. If someone is working on behalf of the district and doing what we ask of them, and they're sticking to whatever we say are approved materials, that we should defend them. And, you know, I think we owe that to our employees. Now, the tricky part will be, I guess, defining that. And there could be people that go rogue, and then maybe at that point they're on their own. But I think that's something that the staff, we need to work on and try to figure out.
Mr. LaFace, are you trying to respond? Okay, Mrs. Whitfield, and then Mrs. Andrews.
I wasn't trying to, but I can respond a little bit. I mean, I think that all of these, all the items raised are good items to discuss and things that we're going to need to provide as much clarity as possible with. I will say that when it relates to the individual freedom, which is House Bill 7, you know, violating that, yeah, I believe under the bill is considered discrimination. So it would be something that would likely be borne by the district if a teacher would be doing it. When it comes to 1557, which is the Don't Say Gay bill, that there's a process in place if there is a parent complaint that involves appealing to the district to resolve the issue, having the state do a mediation, or allowing the parent to sue the district there. So there's various components as we're working through these issues that we'll need to make clear to teachers kind of where they stand and how the district is protecting them and operating under it.
Before the other board members, Ms. Whitfield and Ms. Andrews, ask your questions, I just want to remind you that the superintendent reminded me we have another workshop that was supposed to start at 4, and we have a time certain 5 o'clock meeting. So if you can hold your questions. Ms. Whitfield, I don't believe you've asked any. Ms. Andrews, if you could hold your questions so we can, Mrs. Whitfield, do you have a quick question you'd like to ask?
Yeah, it's just mostly a follow-up on what Dr. Robinson was saying about our teachers. I understand very similarly our students are going through some of the very same stresses right now, you know, feeling that they're not welcome in our schools or being accepted, or that this legislation is going against them. In addition to a press conference that was had this morning, I just want to say to anybody out there watching this and concerned about this, that your school board is here for you, and that I personally want to do everything we can within the scope of the law to support our students, especially ones that are going through trying times. The issue with the YRBS, you know, I worked in public health my whole career, and to lose data is it's almost unbelievable to me, because of the situation where, I mean, we have information in there about physical activity, about nutrition. Are you eating enough fruits and vegetables a day? I mean, there's things in there that just, they guide so much of the work in this community, and the work of the school district, the entire wellness committee that I've sat on for 10 plus years at this point. It is a very big deal to lose that data. And truthfully, it scares me. So to Mr. LaFace and Ms. Fay, thank you so much for being our advocates in Tallahassee. I can't imagine where we would be without you. But I hope that you will help us navigate these waters, specifically when it comes to the health of our students, because these kids, they need to graduate, they need to be educated. And so to be able to get through this time and make them feel welcomed and make them feel accepted, it's what we do as a school system. It's what we have to continue to do. So I feel like there has to be a way through this, and I want all our students to know that we're here for you. Thank you.
All right, I want to thank you, Mr. LaFace, Ms. Fay, and I know Mrs. Solnit's been on listening for today's meeting, so thank you for your help today, and you've got a lot of questions and a lot of concerns that you've heard from the board members, so hopefully you can get back to us on some of those issues we raised today. Mr. Superintendent.
Yes, thank you. And just to reiterate, we don't always get the legislation that we're looking for, but we still have our team. It's not the fault of our team. Our team does a great job, and they've beat back some legislation that could be even worse. And they help us whenever they can. So, thank you for that. We're going to transition to the next workshop.